Morning, ladies and gentlemen. I think we're being broadcast live. Is that the case? Thank you very much. Welcome everybody to the committee today, members of the committee and also other guests. My name is Eric Kerry, Councillor Eric Kerry. I'm chairman of the Pension Fund Committee. Can I remind members that the meeting is being broadcast live and to use your microphones when you're speaking so you can be heard, but to switch them off when you've finished, please. And also can I remind members that following the close of the meeting, we will have a brief lunch followed by cyber security training back here in the chamber. Okay, let's move on to item number 1, which is the minutes of the previous meeting which we held on the 11th of July. Can I ask if the committee will approve the meetings from that meeting? All show, please. Thank you very much. Moving on to item number 2 is apologies for absence. May I ask Keith Ford to confirm any apologies and substitutions, please?
Thank you, Chair. We have Councillor Jim Creamer attending today, substituting for Councillor John Clark, who sends apologies under the category of other reasons. We have Councillor Pauline Allen as substituting for Councillor Sheila Place, who sends apologies under the category of other reasons. We have Councillor John O'Leary substituting for Councillor Roger Jackson, who sends apologies under the category of medical reasons. And we've also had apologies from Yvonne Davidson.
Thank you very much. Anybody aware of any other apologies, please? Okay, I see no indications. Thank you. Item number 3, declarations of interest by members and officers. So does any council officer have any interest in any matter on the agenda that they need to disclose? Okay, I don't see any, so that's fine. Let's move on to item number 4 then, which is our first substantive item. It's the Pension and Lifetime Saving Association Local Authority Conference, which from 2024. And before I hand over to Nigel Stevenson next to me to introduce the report, can I move the recommendations which are on page 13 and 14 of the agenda pack? Can I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor. Nigel, would you take us through the report, please?
Thank you, Chairman. I wasn't going to spend an awful lot of time just reading out what's already written. Hopefully colleagues will see that it's quite a comprehensive report, and from the past I remember colleagues stated that they almost felt that they were there as a consequence of the notes. But I know Talani was there and Francis was also there, so I don't know if there was anything that they needed or wished to add from that particular conference, other than to state that it was a very good conference. I would recommend that colleagues would think about attending for the next one, which will be in around June again in 25, but a different location, not the Cotswolds. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. It is a comprehensive paper with a lot of stuff going on in there. So does anybody want to comment? I'm just sorry, I should have welcomed Tilly Fahir from the Pensions Board. Welcome you here today, and you went to the conference and thought it was very, yes. Do you want to speak, or if you have the microphone? Yes.
Really just wanted to confirm that it was really, really excellent, and I'd recommend that members, if you can, please attend, because it's not just the presentations, but it's also a chance to talk to other members as well.
Thank you very much for that. I see no other indications so the recommendations have been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please. Thank you. That's carried. Moving on to item number 5, which is the working party. Before I hand over to Tamsin, who will introduce the report, I'll move the recommendation, which is on page 16 of our agenda pack. Have a seconder, please.
I'll second that.
Thank you very much, Sue. Tamsin, would you take us through the working party report, please?
Thank you, Chair. The Pension Fund Committee held a working party on the 11th of July 2024 to consider the fund's listed equity allocations. This included a review of the passive active weighting, the allocation to UK listed equities, the allocation to smaller companies and to specialist funds. No changes are being recommended to the committee as a result of the discussions at this time. LGPS Central provided a training on their approach to stewardship, including the impact of securities lending and how this is mitigated by LGPS Central. This training was part of the Fund's programme of regular training to committee members as reported in the annual report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Tamsin. Yes, it was a very interesting meeting, and obviously guided by Mr. Bourne William on the day through all the financial stuff. And bearing in mind we're long-term financiers, long-term fund, I think there's nothing that really shot out that we needed to do in the short term about our investments. So, anybody have any comments or questions, please? It was reasonably well attended, so thank you all for coming on the day. No? Okay. I see no comments or questions, so we need to vote for the recommendation, which has been recommended and seconded. All those in favour, please. Thank you very much. That's carried. Moving on to item number 6, which is the independent advisors report. Before I hand over to Mr. Bourne, to William, to introduce the report, I'd like to move the recommendation on page 21 of the pack, please. In a second.
I'll second that, Chairman.
Thank you. So, William, would you like to take us through your report, please?
Right, thank you very much, Chair. I won't go through in detail. It may sound very strange to say that it's been quite a good period for markets, but actually markets have been quite benign over the last few months, despite the headlines. And the reason, of course, is that central banks have very visibly been cutting rates. And I think it's almost certain that the Fed will cut rates again next week. Make no mistake, though, this is not about inflation, because over the kind of last year or so, commentators have been saying rate cuts will come in response to falling inflation. This is not about that. This is about economic weakness. There's worry among the authorities that the world's slowing down, particularly in America. I think it's misplaced. I think the one country that is a possibility of a recession is China. Elsewhere, I think the world's in a reasonably good place. What it has meant, though, is that bond yields have fallen. And you'll see my paragraph 1 says, I think they should go up. I still think they should be higher on fundamentals, and I mean a lot higher. But what is happening is that the government cannot afford to have bond yields too high because they couldn't afford to pay the interest on their debt. So they are actually taking active measures to try and keep bond yields down. And there's been a bit of a tussle between markets and governments on this. But it looks to me as if over the next short to medium term, although bond yields should go up, they're going to stay kind of much lower than you would expect. And it's a little bit like quantitative easing, QE, which we had prior to 2022. And it's not a bad environment for markets. Ultimately, I do think bond yields have to go up, but I have changed my view a bit. I think it's further out than I thought 3 months ago. And by further out, I mean anything from 1 year through possibly 5, 6, 7 years, so quite a long time. Eventually, bond yields have to go up because the fundamentals are awful at the moment. Final kind of point I just want to mention is the one curveball that really could come to markets over the next few months is the US election. I'm not going to predict what's going to happen, but it clearly has the potential for the market either to go down a lot or to go up a lot. There's a kind of two-way risk there. But broadly, I think the environment for markets is pretty benign at the moment.
Thank you, William. Just might I ask about the yield curve in the US, which seems to be sort of moving very recently. What are your thoughts on that, please?
Yeah, the yield curve is a bit of a technical factor. Normal markets, you expect the yield curve to slope upwards, i.e. yields of long-term bonds are higher than yields of short-term bonds. Over the last couple of years, it's been sloping the other way, which is called an inverted yield curve. And that is taken by some as being a signal of recession coming up. I think in this case, it's much more to do with the fact the government has been pushing up interest rates at the short end to try and get inflation down. And at the same time, at the long end, for the same reason, they can't afford long-term bond yields to be too high. They've been putting them down. So you've had an inverted yield curve. Over the last 3 months, that's kind of gone from downward sloping back to roughly neutral. But again, I think it's been caused by government policy rather than by markets taking a view that we're going to have recession or coming out of recession.
Okay. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions or comments from members, please? Yes, Councillor Bush.
Well, I know it's always very. Thank you. I know it's always very hard to look into the future, obviously, and it's sometimes a bit of a finger in the air. But in your paragraph 3, you're referring to comments, government comments about pensions review to further consolidate and scale across pensions, and then you've got reduce the fragmentation and inefficiencies in the LGPS in particular. So, is there anything sort of you can sort of add to that to explain what that actually might mean, because we all know that well, those who read newspapers, listen to the news, pensions as a whole seem to be getting quite a few headlines as to what may or may not happen, certainly in private pensions. So I'm just wondering about the LGPS side of things. I know you haven't got a crystal ball. I appreciate that, but I'm interested in your thoughts. Thank you.
Yeah, no, very happy to comment on that. The words fragmentation and inefficiencies are the government's words, not mine. They are correct that the LGPS is somewhat fragmented. You know, if you were designing it today, you wouldn't have 86 different teams in England and Wales running what is ultimately a single scheme. But that's the way it's been set up. I disagree with the government when they talk about inefficiencies. Even though the structure may not be the most efficient, the outcomes of the LGPS have actually been very good indeed. The government compares us to the Canadian system and is talking about possibly moving to that kind of system. But actually, I actually published an article on this in the LGC last week. It's online, not in the actual print paper. The outcomes of the LGPS are actually very equivalent to the Canadian one. Basically, we've added value of very roughly 2% a year annualized over the last 10, 20 years. The costs, again, Canadian cost system is actually higher. So the cost of the Canadian system is higher than ours. So I really push back at the government when they talk about inefficient outcomes. Now, that all said, they may well have their fingers in their ears and not listen. And I don't think you should assume that the fact that we have done a reasonably good job means that pooling and consolidation won't happen. Consolidation, I mean, I think there's fairly good arguments for saying that not in every case, but in aggregate, scale is a way to better outcomes. And that's really where the government is coming from. Not the case that only big companies, only big funds can produce efficient outcomes, but in aggregate, and they may be saying, well, look, we know that some of your small funds are doing well, but actually in aggregate, we want you to move to greater scale because there are better outcomes. They have put out a call for evidence over the last 10 days or so, which I know Tams is going to be responding to either individually or possibly on behalf, together with other central funds. I'm going to respond to it myself, and I'm sure other funds will. Trouble is, again, I don't think the government's going to listen to it, I'm afraid. I am going to the LGC conference. It's actually today and tomorrow in Birmingham tomorrow, and apparently the minister's going to make a statement there. It's only a recorded statement, but you may find you hear a bit more tomorrow morning in the newspapers. Does that help at all?
That is, it's certainly very interesting, and it is helpful. And I think it is a case, isn't it, between us all of watching the newspapers and just keeping an eye on, because LGPS is efficient and has been for many years, and we don't want anything that's going to put it at risk, shall we say? But thank you, that's really helpful. Thank you.
And I think thank you for raising that question. Obviously, we have a fiduciary duty too, and we need to fight for our corner. Councillor Waters.
Yeah, just to kind of add to what William has said, the proposal seemed to be to merge a lot of LGPS funds together in hope it will reduce the underlying costs of the scheme. However, if you look at ONS statistics, mortality, people in the East Midlands don't have as high and the North don't have as high a life expectancy as some places down in London and in the South. So if you were to merge schemes together, it could actually be to the detriment of our members. So I'd strongly advocate for keeping things as they are, quite frankly. So any kind of extra additional support you want from our group, I'm happy to try and help with that.
I think the government is struggling with the fact that the LGPS was set up under the 72 Local Government Act, which very clearly is based on local accountability. solutions they're moving towards are completely different. They're talking about independent pension funds. And I think they're going to struggle greatly with making that change. Unless they decide to ditch the whole LGA Act and rewrite it, it's going to be very, very hard for them to do it. And that's why I think they're talking about merging funds, but I don't think they can compulsorily merge funds. They may encourage us to do it. And you're quite right. The big issues are always on the liability side, much more than on the asset side.
It's also a bit of a concern where they're talking about reducing some of the fiduciary duties, so that they could be invested in all sorts of assets we wouldn't wish to invest in.
Yeah, that's absolutely an important point. Totally agree with that. Yeah, William, did you want to come in on that?
I make a very quick comment on fiduciary duty. I'm pretty clear that what they're proposing to do is encouraging. They're not breaking pension law themselves, but they are encouraging us to contribute in pension law, and I'm very happy to go into the legals behind that. I'm convinced that if they move ahead, there will be some form of legal challenge, and that's why I think they'll be quite careful about their wording, not saying you must do this, but saying we would like you to do this. And I think we have to be very aware of where our duty lies.
Yeah, and I think the main point is something will be coming, but we need to be ready for it, and I think that's the key, being prepared. Okay, any other questions or comments, please? No? Okay. Thank you very much for your presentation and answer to questions, William. We've moved the recommendation and seconded. All those in favour, please. Thank you. That's unanimous. Okay, and we now move on to item 7, which is the work programme. The recommendations on page 27. I'll move that. Thank you very much. Tamsin, would you like to take us through the work programme, please?
Thank you, Chair. In the appendix, you can see the work programme for the rest of the committee meetings of the current cycle. The committee is asked to identify any additional reports required. Additionally, as William has mentioned, there has been a call for evidence by the government on the investment review. This was published after the deadline for papers for this committee, and the response must be submitted by the 25th of September. Given the tight timescale, I suggest our response is compiled by officers in consultation with the Chair, Vice Chair and Section 151 officer and reported to the next committee meeting. But members who have anything they'd like to contribute would be very welcome to email me.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Tamsin. I mean, what we could do is just share that with the group leaders of each group in here during that process. So I don't know, but whether Councillor Waters or I don't know. Okay, there's no reaction. So, Councillor Waters, do you want to be involved in that?
I'm happy to be involved in that. Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, I see no other indication. So if we yes.
Yeah, I've got something to potentially add if you're happy to hear it now, Mrs. Okay, as an item to add to the work programme, could the working party consider making a one-off payment from the Nottinghamshire Pension Fund to scheme members in retirement to mitigate or offset the impact of the withdrawal of the winter fuel allowance?
Ooh. I'm not sure whether we can legally do that. I don't think we can consider. I understand your political point you're making. I don't want to politicise the fund in that way either. I don't think. Yeah.
I'm grateful for the question. I think you'll find the regulations in terms of how and who we can pay and for what for are really tight. In which case, I doubt at all that we'll be able to do such a thing. But we will take it away and check that legal back and come back to you, Councillor Waters.
Okay. Great. So if we could look into that, because it would help our members who've had to endure something unexpected.
Okay. Thank you very much. Any other comments, questions about the work programme? Councillor Butler.
Well, actually, just going back to the previous point about this call for evidence that I mean, it seems extraordinarily tight, given the significance and importance of the LGPS and pension scheme to be given notice to provide evidence. What, a couple of weeks, with a couple of weeks time to do it? Does seem very, very strange. But there we are. It is what it is, and we are where we are. But can we just confirm? And apologies if you've said this already, but I may not have noticed it. But will we, as a pensions committee, get to see this? Even although the next meeting isn't until November, I think, isn't it? But will we sort of see what we're sending in as evidence before that meeting?
I think what Tamsin is recommending is that the Section 151 officer and the chair of the committee, vice chair, and Tamsin work something out, and with your approval for that.
Yes, shall I circulate it once we've got it, and then it
would
can
be
come
really helpful.
formally to committee, but it then means everybody knows what's going on.
Yeah, we've got to do it quickly. So
I think that would be really. I think we'd all appreciate that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Good point. Are you okay, Sue? Oh, sorry. Okay. Right. So I think we've discussed the work programme. A few comments and questions. Can we vote on the recommendation, please? All those in favour of the work programme? Thank you. That's unanimous. Okay. Moving on to item number 8, which is fund valuation and performance. The recommendation is on page 41 of our pack. I'd like to recommend that, please, and a seconder. Thank you very much. Tamsin, would you take us through the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. This report is to inform the Nottinghamshire Pension Fund Committee of the value of the pension fund at the end of the latest quarter and provide information on the performance of the fund. The table in paragraph 3 shows the valuation at the end of June, at the end of March, and the value a year ago. The fund investments have increased by 108 million, which is 1.5% since the last quarter. Within this valuation is 525 million of infrastructure investments, over 100 million of which is now invested through the LGPS Central Infrastructure Funds. Infrastructure investments are now 7.4% of the fund, with 8.5% of the fund committed to infrastructure investments against an allocation of 9.3%. Paragraph 6 shows a more detailed analysis of valuations by portfolio, and paragraph 8 shows the unaudited fund account for 23-24 and comparative figures for last year. Paragraphs 9 to 20 relate to the fund's holding in fossil fuel companies and investments in sustainable equities and renewable energy. There are a number of caveats that need to be understood in interpreting this disclosure, which are explained in the report, and I refer members to these. Over time, it is anticipated that fossil fuels will decrease as a proportion of the fund and that investment in sustainable equity and renewable energy will increase, but this long-term trend will not be smooth. At the end of June, we had an estimated investment of 207 million in fossil fuel companies, which is 2.9% of the fund, and sustainable and renewable energy investments amounting to 912 million, or 12.8% of the fund. Members are reminded that a more thorough assessment of our exposure to fossil fuels through our equity investments is provided by LGPS Central's carbon risk analysis. The core index portfolio section reflects the equity market movements over the last quarter. The Schroders portfolio shows the regional analysis of holdings and purchases and sales through the period. The LGPS Central portfolio shows our investments made through the pool. Aberdeen have continued to manage our property portfolio. The specialist portfolio section shows the composition and valuation of the specialist portfolio and the transactions during the quarter. The section on responsible investment activity summarises some of the responsible investment activity which has taken place during the quarter on behalf of the fund. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Tamsin. As William's commented, markets are a little bit benign in total going forward, so we're still about 7.1 billion at the last date of measurement. Are there any questions or comments from members, please? And do remember that we're having LGIM and Schroders in the exempt part of the meeting. So, none? Okay, thank you very much. So the recommendation has been made and seconded. Can I have a vote, please, on approving that? All those in favour? Any abstentions? Okay, there's an abstention, but it's carried. Thank you. Okay. We now move on to item number 9, which is exclusion of the public. So now move on that part of the agenda that proposes meeting closed session to consider the exempt information in agenda items 10 and 11. I therefore invite the committee to resolve that the public be excluded for the remainder of the meeting on the grounds that the discussion are likely to involve the disclosure of exempt information as described in Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972, and the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing that information. May I ask for a seconder, please?
I'll second that, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll take a vote by show of hands, please. Okay, that's unanimous. So we now would like any of the members of the public to thank you for your interest, both here and online, and we'll move to the exempt item.